The late Victorian era in London, already shrouded in the smog and terror left by Jack the Ripper, concealed an even more unsettling pattern of violence that operated along the city's murky lifeline, the River Thames. Between 1887 and 1888, and extending sporadically into the 1890s, a series of human torsos and dismembered body parts were discovered floating in the river or washed up along its banks. These were not the bloody, staged murders of Whitechapel. These were forensic puzzles involving bodies meticulously dissected, drained of blood, and strategically dispersed across the vast expanse of the city's waterways, signaling the presence of a predator known only as the Thames Torso Murderer or the Raynham Mystery Killer, a figure perhaps more skilled and elusive than the Ripper himself. The initial discovery, which officially began the terror, was made in May 1887. The torso of a woman, later dubbed the Raynham Torso, was found near Raynham in Essex, a significant distance downriver from London proper. The body had been expertly dismembered, with the limbs and head removed with chilling precision. What set this case apart was the deliberate act of separation. The limbs and head were never recovered, making identification virtually impossible. This MO immediately suggested a killer motivated by obfuscation and concealment, aiming to erase the victim's identity entirely by separating the facial features and the hands used for fingerprinting. The discoveries continued. In June 1887, more body parts were found, and in September, the torso of a woman was found beneath a railway arch near Battersea, exhibiting similar surgical incisions. The consistency of the cutting, performed with neat, almost clinical separation at the joints, convinced Scotland Yard that they were dealing with a single, highly skilled perpetrator. The killer was not hacking or randomly slicing. He was disarticulating the bodies, demonstrating specialized anatomical knowledge that pointed directly toward a doctor, a surgeon, a butcher, or someone trained in the dissection of cadavers, likely operating out of a private facility or a secluded room. The most bizarre detail of the Battersea case was the discovery of the victim's blood-soaked petticoat, found nearby but meticulously wrapped and folded. The precision with which the garment was stored, juxtaposed with the brutal violence committed against the body, suggested a killer who was intensely compulsive and tidy, obsessed with the cleanliness and order of the crime scene. This fastidious nature was the opposite of the messy, impulsive violence seen in many other crimes of the era, marking the Thames Torso Murderer as a unique psychological threat. The investigation was immediately hampered by the medium of the crime, the river. The Thames, with its massive tidal movements and high volume of traffic, was an ideal dumping ground. The currents and the sheer scale of the waterway meant that the body parts could have been deposited anywhere from the docks near the East End to the bridges of central London, drifting dozens of miles before being discovered. This fluid environment destroyed crucial forensic evidence and made establishing a definitive crime scene, the place where the victims were killed, virtually impossible. The police were forced to rely on anthropometry, measurements of the body, and the unique circumstances of the dismemberment to try and identify the victims, all of whom were women of varying ages and backgrounds. The victims were often identified only by their distinctive clothing or pieces of fabric still clinging to the torso, leading to long, frustrating searches through the city's laundry records and tailor shops, rarely leading to a positive identity. The reign of the Torso Murderer continued into 1888, creating an overlap with the highly publicized attacks of Jack the Ripper in Whitechapel. This overlap led to intense public speculation that the two killers were the same person. However, Scotland Yard quickly separated the cases. While the Ripper's victims were killed and mutilated in situ, on the spot, and left with a chaotic display of internal organs, the Torso Murderer's victims were killed, dissected elsewhere, drained of blood, and strategically disposed of, showing a clear distinction in MO and psychological motive. The geographical focus of the torso murders often centered around the docks and the transient populations near the Thames, including sailors, dock workers, and victims of the city's underbelly. This led detectives to theorize that the killer might be a seaman, a ship's surgeon, or someone who had easy access to the river via a barge or a hidden dockside workshop. The river itself became the killer's accomplice, washing away the evidence and concealing the true location of the victim's identity. One of the most compelling suspects, who was never conclusively proven, was Dr. Thomas Neil Cream, also known as the Lambeth Poisoner. Cream was a doctor who operated in the area and was eventually convicted of killing several women with strychnine. While his MO was poisoning, his medical background, his proximity to the area, and his known history of hostility toward women made him a dark candidate. Some historians suggest he may have briefly experimented with dismemberment before settling on poisoning, though evidence remains tenuous. Another key figure was a medical student operating in the East End, but the investigation was constantly hindered by the lack of centralized records for anatomical dissection. During the Victorian era, unauthorized medical practice and the black market for cadavers were common, providing a perfect cover for a killer with surgical skill to acquire or dispose of bodies without raising suspicion. The police had no reliable way to track every medical student or former surgeon who had access to knives and dissection tables. The investigation focused heavily on the unique phenomenon of the Pinchin Street Torso, discovered in 1889. The body was discovered wrapped in a sheet and was notably found in an area close to Whitechapel. The debate surrounding this victim was fierce. Was it the work of the Ripper making a clean kill, or the torso murderer moving inland? The meticulous surgical separation pointed toward the Thames killer, but the location linked it to the Ripper's hunting ground, creating a frustrating ambiguity that the police were never able to resolve, further complicating the official tally for both killers. The case gained international attention not only for its gruesomeness, but for the profound legal and scientific challenge it posed. The investigation forced Scotland Yard to confront the limitations of 19th century forensics. Without fingerprinting or DNA analysis, and with the primary evidence constantly moving in the river, the police were fighting an uphill battle against a killer who mastered the art of zero-evidence crime. The psychological profile developed at the time suggested a killer driven by an extreme need for control and depersonalization. Unlike the Ripper, whose attacks were frenzied and disorganized, the Thames killer's acts were clinical, suggesting a desire to reduce the victim from a person to a mere specimen, a collection of anatomical parts to be disposed of, revealing a cold, calculating detachment that was profoundly disturbing. The sporadic nature of the discoveries, spanning over a decade, suggests the killer was either highly mobile, often traveling for work like a ship's doctor, or was imprisoned or institutionalized for long periods, only resuming his horrific acts upon release. The lack of a concentrated cluster of attacks, unlike the Ripper's 5 canonical murders, made it impossible for police to predict the killer's next move or stake out a specific area. The enduring tragedy of the Thames Torso murders is the total and final erasure of the victims' identities. Because the heads and hands were never found, many of the women remain nameless to this day, their lives reduced to a number in a Victorian crime file, their names lost to the flow of the river, which was the killer's ultimate weapon and accomplice. The final act of the Torso Murderer, the systematic dismemberment and concealment, ensured his own success. He never wrote a taunting letter, never boasted publicly, and never left a signature other than the precision of his knife. This silent, meticulous approach allowed him to achieve the true goal of an elusive serial killer: to remain completely unknown, a true ghost of the Thames. To this day, the Thames Torso Murderer remains an anonymous master of concealment, his victims' names lost forever beneath the murky waters of the Thames.